Hello and welcome to Mental Health Matters. It's the show where we take a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being. My co-host is Judith Crosier, and today our topic is Imposter Syndrome. Hey, Jude, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Interesting topic for today.
Very.
Now, I wanted to start with calling it Imposter Syndrome because that's what everyone calls it. Its actual name is Imposter Phenomenon.
Oh.
And I know that sounds so silly, but it's one of the things that academics get all very upset about.
That's fine.
Because a syndrome is something that is diagnosable. It has very distinct ways of saying, right, this is what you're suffering from, even ways of supporting it that can be therapeutic or medical. But imposter phenomenon is a feeling, and it's that feeling that you're not good enough. It has been sort of named by a psychologist, Pauline Clancy, but it is a phenomenon.
Right.
So,
okay.
so I wanted to kick off with that.
Thank you.
But how have you felt in terms of it having imposter phenomenon? Have you ever?
I think probably most people have done. I definitely did. Most of my jobs, no, because you come in, you are taught from the ground up generally in many of the jobs that I've done. But with teaching is a real one because the children don't see all that training that you've had before. They just, when you take your first job and you're in front of a class, that you're their teacher, even if you've never had a class before. Yeah. And so that's such a responsibility. And I mean, there's been many days when I've been stood teaching a class thinking, what am I even doing? And I know that I'm doing the right thing and I'm teaching them the correct things, but there is that at the back of your mind, oh my goodness, I'm responsible for these children. They do kind of hang on your every word up to a certain age. And that imposter phenomenon does come into it. You think, am I the right person? Should I be here? Am I the right person to be doing this?
You know, I'm really glad you brought up teaching because that's such a beautiful way of describing the responsibility of what teaching is. And yet, and this is, I know, digressing off the point, but have you ever, in your experience, found those people who've gone into teaching because they simply like the soapbox, they like being the person to spread their knowledge and tell people almost the opposite?
Yes, I mean, there are people who I've come across that I bet they're a teacher, or I bet they used to be a teacher because they enjoy that position of imparting knowledge or yes.
I'm talking about a slightly more nefarious way, because there's some people where if you're a teacher, you like teaching and that's great. Yes. But I'm sort of talking about as a teacher, I have a captive audience. They have to sit there and listen to me.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And I get to be in the big chair. That happens as well.
That does happen. And I don't think that they feel like they're imposters then, if that's how they're thinking, which is fine because they've got confidence and they want to be there.
But
you're not convinced.
No, because I'm actually, Liz, you're so kind. It's lovely. You can't see where I'm going with it. I'm talking about arrogance. I'm talking about the ones who go, right, you all have to listen to me. As in, I am the only person with knowledge. I am the only person, that type.
Yeah, okay.
And I've seen those teachers.
They do exist.
And
they do exist.
Because I've worked in secondary more.
Yeah, of course.
And whether that's more a secondary thing, I don't know.
No. That happens in primary as well. Yeah.
But it's really interesting, isn't it, how you get this different type. So when we talk about imposter phenomenon, what you're talking about is you have that responsibility, you take that responsibility so seriously, and we always feel we're just not good enough.
Yeah.
And then you get other people on the other side of the scale who are almost so either narcissistic or arrogant and so kind of, oh, I'm just so brilliant. And in a way that makes us feel...
Yes, exactly. And there are, I think you're right, there are the two types. And it's easy to feel like, we're not good enough. And to be in a position where you are good enough because you wouldn't be there otherwise. But you just have that self-doubt and and it might not be there all the time, but it definitely can come into any aspect of any job. But I found it more in teaching.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this really relates to sort of what I feel about doing the show. I like to think we've got the confidence to do it, we're here, we're doing it, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
But because now we are having to go out into the social media space.
Yeah.
We are having to go out and give those sound bites and things like that, which maybe we're not so used to doing. In a 56-minute show, we've actually got time to unpack certain things. But then I look at influencers who don't actually have the qualifications, who don't have the understanding of the topic. They may have some lived experience, but not necessarily the background, the ethics, the safeguarding, the technical side of the learning.
That's it.
And they're out there, and I feel bad. I feel not good enough because they're the ones who are...
And yet you're the ones with the qualifications and the huge amount of experience.
It's so weird,
It's funny, isn't it? That, I mean, I wouldn't imagine for a second that you would feel imposter syndrome. That surprises me.
Yeah.
It does.
It's really weird. But yes, so this is why it's
a very interesting topic.
Today's special guest is Judy Lindsay from Optimise Coaching. Welcome to Mental Health Matters, Judy.
Thank you very much for your welcome.
It's such a pleasure to chat with you because I know imposter phenomenon is something that you deal with in your work. Not you personally necessarily, but
very much so.
Oh, we can talk about that. But with your clients. But first of all, tell us a little bit about your work and maybe a little bit about coaching in particular, because I know people sometimes confuse that with counselling a little bit.
Okay. So I'm a chartered psychologist and an accredited coaching psychologist. So that allows me across lots of different contexts to have coaching conversations with people at times of transition in their lives, times of change particularly. Coaching conversations are different from counselling, and we often talk about this idea of thriving as a result of coaching. People who are well, who have their lives reasonably sorted, but need to do something a little bit more by way of a conversation to make sure they're on the best track and living their best lives. So I would say that's perhaps a little difference between those.
I think that's great, and I like the fact that you're talking about transition. And that key word, that's when it happens the most, isn't it? When you're making that change from one thing that you maybe know really, really well to something completely different. Is that where you notice?
Oh, absolutely. And most of the people that I work with are at some kind of stage of transition in life, making a change, because that is when the challenges feel like they need a little bit of supporting.
So do you notice that people maybe have some element of imposter phenomenon when they're going into something completely different than they've done before?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Because you're very often moving into a sphere that you haven't been in before. And that can mean that actually... So imposter phenomenon is very often spoken about as fear of being seen as a fraud. It's something I've experienced, and it's given me a sort of cognitive dissonance, because I've thought, well, I haven't deceived anybody. I haven't committed fraud. How can I be being found out to be a fraud? And actually, I think what we feel is we feel a fear of being seen to be a mistake.
Gosh.
And you think, okay, someone made a mistake allowing me to be in this position.
Exactly.
But we don't think in terms of someone else making a mistake. We very quickly think we are the mistake. And I think that's the problem. To me, that's how I experience imposter phenomenon. And it's sort of unpacking that a little bit. And I think very often it's not the competence or a lack of competence in what we're doing which gives us that feeling. It's perhaps that we've moved into a new social sphere or a new educational sphere or whatever it is, workplace, where we haven't been before. So it's actually the social rules and expectations that we don't know. We haven't grown up with those, and therefore we don't have that underlying ease with them. And it's that that's making us feel awkward or ill-fitting.
That's really big to unpack, actually, because there's a couple of things there which sort of resonate. The first is this idea of the not knowing the social norms and social rules, and the ease at which. So I think that's a nice way, maybe a practical way to support somebody. But your point about feeling we're the mistake, that goes much deeper psychologically, doesn't that?
Yeah.
That's into worth and its self-value. I mean, how do you support somebody who thinks they are a mistake to be in their position?
I think understanding what's going on is the big key. I wish I had understood at earlier times in my life that actually I was competent. I did have a right to be there, which is what my brain was telling me. And it was simply that these other things, these social norms, were what I was unfamiliar with. And if you understand that, then it's those sort of slightly superficial things that can be taught, learned, or you can choose not to go with them because of who you are. I think actually it can be a specific problem that women face, simply because, okay, we live in a world now where very often the doors are wide open in employment and workplaces, and there's a genuine welcome for women. But if we move into a sphere which has previously been the province, the exclusive domain of males, then those social ways of being have been evolved from a male perspective. And therefore that can make us feel we don't quite fit here. And then the challenge, of course, is, do I adapt to those, or do I chart a course and be the different person? And they're equally difficult choices.
Yeah, and I like this point, because we've talked about this before in our show on burnout.
Okay.
When it comes to, do I become like it? Do I accept what's going on? And just because you accept it and deal with it and be part of it doesn't actually make it a good thing all the time. Sometimes charting the new course is the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
How do you help somebody find the personal power to be able to kind of go, right, I'm doing it this way?
One of the things that I think is really important when changing pathway, so going into a new place, is to make sure that the new pathway aligns with own personal values. So coaching conversations are a very good way of finding out what our values are, but they're not the only way people can do that. Very often if we're changing pathways, work for example, it's because the pathway we have been on no longer aligns with our own values, and that's making us uncomfortable. And that might be because policies changed, it might be because people have changed, doesn't matter what it is. But it's very important to make sure that the pathway that we now take aligns with our values. And if we get that pathway aligning with our values, we are feeling more confident in ourselves to be ourselves, because we can do that which feels right to us.
So this is just going back to our conversation at the start of the show.
Yep.
You talked about teaching. Now, to me, you are just a wonderful teacher. In fact, when I moved to primary, because I did primary for a while, I asked you for help.
Yeah.
And so somebody who's so natural, aligned with values, why might this happen? Why might you still feel that you're not good enough? You've had all the qualifications, did all the teaching practice, and it's what you want to do. You want to help people, you want to do all of those positive things.
I teach, I lecture. So I was lecturing yesterday. And I don't think there's anything more critical than young people or people to whom you are speaking. But actually, and I did at one point think it was a new group, I've never met them before, it was a lecture theatre. And I did at one point think, well, will they think I am sufficient of an expert on this to be taking their time? I think that's what you feel sometimes, isn't it? But that's very fleeting with me now. Because things that I have learnt are, it's okay to say you don't know something.
That's true.
Because you have to go and find, you can go and find it out. I actually learnt that as a lawyer, because I was a lawyer. You're not expected to know all the law. You're just expected to know where to go and find it.
Yes, it's all right to say I'll go and find out and let you know.
And I took that across to my teaching when I went into teaching in that workplace. But also, when it has happened yesterday, someone comes and says, well, this might be an error in the paperwork or something like that. I accept that as something to which I'm grateful for. I say thank you, because it's all right to make a mistake. It's important to recognise making a mistake doesn't make me a mistake. Okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I'll look into it. If it needs correcting and can be corrected, I'll correct it. It's just being a little bit more relaxed about not having to be perfect.
That's such a beautiful affirmation. We talk about affirmations a lot, but making a mistake doesn't make me a mistake.
Yeah.
And it's what we teach the children or your students.
Yes.
So we need to take that on board ourselves.
We do need to take it on board. Another sort of little affirmation that I often share with people is that feelings aren't facts. And that lack of having the appropriate social graces maybe might be what's making us feel uncomfortable. But then if we recognise that's just a feeling, that's just something that I'm feeling at the moment, it doesn't mean I'm inappropriate to be here, that I am a mistake.
Gosh, it's so complex. There are so many different things. So you've given us affirmations, which are a great start. How might you start helping someone unpack what they're feeling to address those feelings of, I shouldn't be here?
Values is definitely, to go back to that, I just think that's fundamental.
Yeah.
Making sure that a person knows their own values and can see ways of living in harmony with their values and organising their time and their days in a way that allows for that. That's very important, I think. Recognising what's going on, as I say, that it doesn't make sense, if you like, to say I shouldn't be here. Yeah, I have got the qualifications. And trying to find out what it is that's making them feel uncomfortable. And it might be that they are trying to, as you said, adapt too much. I mean, if you try and wear someone else's shoes, it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You feel very unsteady and very insecure. So it's going back to your values and wearing your own shoes, I think, can really help.
This is part of it. So, I don't know whether you found this with teaching, but I certainly did. When I first joined as a drama teacher, I was faced with, Sir never did this, Sir never did that. I was living in the shadow of this amazing person. I mean, I didn't know they were amazing or whatever. But
they probably weren't.
You know,
but if the students thought so, that puts you under a lot of pressure.
So, I mean, there's so many outside things that add to it. What other kind of social pressures? So you've got the fact that you might be stepping into somebody's classroom or office space which you didn't know, and they might have had a brilliant presence for whatever reason. But also we've got, I guess, our own upbringing and our own thoughts about ourselves.
We've got our own sense of who we are. Again, the more we are living true to who we are, the more comfortable we will be, which is so much easier said than done. And of course there's something else as well. At different stages of our lives, if we're talking about changing pathways, at different stages of our lives, we have so many more demands upon us, or different demands upon us. And we have different responsibilities to different people. So a lot of the people I work with, most of the people I work with are women. And so people have responsibilities to children, to parents, to partners, to even to maintaining that independence that's been hard won. All of these different demands are crashing in as we're trying to establish ourselves in a new pathway, perhaps. And it's having that compassion, isn't it, and recognising that, you know, we are doing a good job and the best job possible in the circumstances. Realistic.
You mentioned women. Now, I know as women we sit there and kind of go, well, yeah, we've been through it, we chat about it. But every time I've spoken to other coaches, other counsellors who go into organisations, they'll sit there and go, there's no gender difference. Actually, men feel the same as, or some men really do feel it.
Yes. No, I think the issues apply to everybody. But I think it is valid to address the specific way in which women might experience these things. Yes, they affect everybody, especially in the changing social landscape of opportunity and work. Yes, these issues can affect anybody. It may well be that the same issues that are being faced by us as women are being faced by other people in this changing landscape. But I'm just saying, for many of the women I work with, it is that multiplicity of demands upon them and the expectations and responsibilities, which mean they have to juggle.
Yeah.
And I frequently say, well, you know, that is brilliant in all your circumstances.
Yeah. I like that point. I like that point about recognising it's brilliant for somebody to be able to do that juggling in the first place. Because, again, and I know you say this one a lot, you likes to use, you just do it. You just do it, don't you? You just get on with it. You just get on. But actually, no, you just get on with it. You personally, because you have the resilience and the capacity to just get on with it. Other people don't.
Okay.
And I think we need to recognise that.
Yeah, probably. And probably I don't, you know, I don't get that. And also I think that maybe women are more likely to seek the help, whereas men may just get on with it or try to get on with it. I don't know.
It is a changing landscape, definitely. And with new opportunities comes new challenges, doesn't it? You know, on both, for both. So many men now take on childcare duties, so they will have that juggling to do.
Yeah.
But that is part of a changing landscape.
Well, Jude, you are staying with us now, but we'll just introduce our next guest. And it's resident expert Felicia Jones. Felicia started her own company, Stress Less Living, and she's a nutritionist who recognises that what we put into our body can have an effect on our body, but also what's coming into our body from the outside can also have an effect on our mind and emotions. So she will be talking about inclusivity in the workplace and how women can address imposter syndrome. And then in Business Boost, I'll be giving a few tips on how to overcome some of those negative feelings.
Hi there! It's so great to be here with you today on Mental Health Matters, because for me, mental health really does matter. My name's Felicia Jones and I'm a nutritionist and a stress management trainer. I'm also the founder and owner of Stressless Living. So I wanted to talk to you about something that I think is really important, and that's imposter syndrome. And when I was thinking about this, one of the things that really got me thinking was the theme of International Women's Day, which is to inspire inclusion. And you know, there's so much that women still need to do. There's only 1 in 5 women that holds a boardroom position, and that's in the top 350 organisations in the UK. Women are more likely to be in poverty, and we've still got a gender pay gap. So as I said, you know, there's a lot to be done. But it's not only about those voices outside our head, those voices that we need to silence. We don't often talk about those voices inside our head. Those voices that say, you can't do it, you're not good enough. Who do you think you are? You're an imposter. And it can affect us so much. It can affect us mentally, but what we also don't often talk about is how it impacts us physically. So let's get into it a little bit. Let's talk about it today. You know, as we get older, we have all of these amazing life experiences, and some of them are really great. But unfortunately, some of them aren't so great. And this is where imposter syndrome comes in. When we're trying to do something new, something that we haven't done before or haven't done for a long while, that imposter comes back in, that voice saying that we can't do it. And it can be really devastating. It can make us shrink and feel smaller and smaller and smaller. It can stop us taking risks. It can stop us doing those things that are really healthy for us, that make our heart sing, those things that help us to grow, to develop. It can just be really uncomfortable and debilitating. You might have heard me speak before about my experience of having chronic fatigue syndrome, and that was a horrible experience. But what was also really challenging was the amount of confidence that I lost. It was just like overnight I felt as if I was this person, and then I wasn't. I wasn't working, and I didn't feel as if I was part of society. And then when I went back into work, when I started running my own projects with my business, I just felt I couldn't do it. That imposter syndrome was really, really big, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. You know, as I said, one of the things is that it affects our mental health. It also can impact our physical health, because as we get these new projects coming up, these new challenges, you know, it could be going for an interview, it could be running a marathon, anything that's different for us, we'll start to feel nervous. And we need energy to tackle these things. And so we have adrenaline running through our veins and cortisol on a longer term basis. But that can make us feel really uncomfortable. And before we know it, we can be in that state of fight and flight, really not knowing if we're coming and going. So we know all of the things that can impact us, but what can we do about it? Well, the first thing I say is stop, slow down, take a deep breath. And the reason we do that is because it oxygenates our brain. It helps to lower our blood pressure, to stop our heart beating so strongly. It can help us to feel more in control. And the second thing, I know you'll say, well, as a nutritionist you'd say this, and yes I will, have a look at your diet. And it's not only about eating those foods that can make us feel calmer, those lovely B vitamin foods that help our nervous system, or the oils that help with our brain function. It's also looking at having a lot of different nutrients. So looking at those foods that can actually give us more energy, those lovely complex carbohydrates, the whole grains. Having a look at having great protein. And that can also be in seeds and nuts, and that can also be in pulses. Having a look at those lovely rich oils that can help, as I said, you know, with our brain function. And simply drinking a lot of water and getting a lot of vegetables that help with our digestion. Having those foods that will help us to feel well, that will help us to have a balanced, stable blood sugar, not feeling really high 1 minute and feeling really low the next. And then the final thing is to get a good night's sleep. I know it sounds really simple, but getting a good night's sleep can really help us to repair. And when we do that, it can prepare us for all of the things that are going to come up. So it sounds simple. Breathe, stop, slow down. Have a really good nutritious diet. And the third thing, you know, get a good night's sleep. Because all of those things can help us to address all those things that are going to come up, but also to start answering that imposter syndrome and saying, you're wrong, you know, I'm better than I think I am, I can do this. And it means that whatever age we are, when we've got an interview coming up, when we've got a new project, when we're trying to get over that glass ceiling, we're going to be able to do that. And we're going to be able to not only help ourselves, but actually support and help others. And in the long term, what we're going to do is we're going to inspire inclusion.
This is Giovanna Tartarone, your host of Spark and Change with Gigi, empowering personal and global transformation. Join me every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the Fresh Takes Network, right here live at E360 TV.
In today's Business Boost, I wanted to give you some tips to manage those feelings of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon whenever they rear their heads. Now, the first tip is to think more in terms of self-compassion statements rather than self-esteem. When we grow up, we are often inundated with self-esteem statements, which is praising us in comparison to somebody else. Whereas self-compassion is much more about praising ourselves in that singular way. So the difference is, for example, if you run a race and you don't win, and a self-esteem statement is, I didn't win, but at least I didn't come last, because that way you kind of feel better, but that's because you've made somebody else feel not so good. But when it comes to self-compassion, something more along the lines of, I didn't win, but I'm proud of myself for showing up. At least I ran, or at least I worked at it. Those sorts of statements are much more about you, and it keeps the focus more on yourself rather than thinking in comparison with. So that's the first thing. Try to use more self-compassion statements rather than self-esteem. The next tip is to, as our expert has said, recognize that you are feeling those feelings. And then you may wish to think about the evidence to really support some of those feelings and maybe dispute some of those thoughts that you might be having. A third tip is to, and this is something I have to use quite a lot, I mentioned my own feelings of imposter phenomenon when I would look at social media, and I sometimes get this, you might as well, when you look at, say, something like LinkedIn or those social platforms and people are posting, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I got this promotion, that promotion, and it's all very exciting. And yes, I have to remind myself that's someone's highlights reel, but also I try to change those feelings of inferiority or fear or even resentment at someone else's success into gratitude that I got to see it, gratitude that I got to share in that. Gratitude that I got to be part of saying well done, because that feeling inspires me to do better on my own things as well. And if I really want extra help, I might even approach them and ask them how they did it. So that's something else too. Another thing we can think about is receiving praise better. Because sometimes our feelings of worth relate to our recognition of the validation of other people, but we don't always recognize when other people are trying to validate us. And if you have ever been in a situation where someone has said thank you so much and you've gone, oh, it's nothing. Oh, don't say it. Oh, it's fine. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. What I'd like you to do is, if somebody gives you praise or a thank you, you don't need to go, oh yes, of course, I'm so wonderful. You don't need to do that at all. But what you can say is just simply, you're welcome. Or that's really kind of you. I appreciate that. Because if you think about a thank you as a gift that somebody has chosen to give to you, because we all know criticizing someone is a lot easier than praising someone. So we are much more likely to criticize when something goes wrong than we are to thank or recognize when something goes well. So think about that person as having taken the time to recognize what you did well, point it out, wrap it all up for you and give it to you. And actually, if you go, oh no, it wasn't me, it was everybody else, you're actually kind of rejecting a really lovely gift. So that's just another thing that you can think about. And the final thought I would like to leave you with is that sometimes actually we do need to listen to our inner critic. So whilst imposter phenomenon can be this inner voice saying, oh, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, all of those kinds of quite bullying statements, I know I personally have an inner voice that kind of goes, I'll be fine. You'll be all right. Just do it and it'll be okay. And it isn't usually, because it means I haven't planned something, or I haven't really thought about it, or I've rushed something, or it might be as simple as I will have that other slice of cake and then the other slice and then the other slice, and that's okay. It won't matter. That's not the time to be nice to yourself. Sometimes your inner critic actually needs to work for you. So the question you have to ask yourself is, do I need to listen to this voice right now or don't I? Because sometimes your inner critic does have your best interests at heart. Welcome back to Mental Health Matters. We are talking about imposter phenomenon, and we have our guest expert, Judy, Lindsay of Optimise Coaching with us, and we've been unpacking this phenomenon. And there's a lot to say. So when it comes to what people feel most scared about, what are some of the common key elements?
I think people are worrying about failure, but that means being inadequate. And you've talked about, standing in front of a class, and you don't want to run out of words and feel that you don't know how to carry on any further. But I think a lot of it is letting people down. You mentioned letting the class down, but also it's letting ourselves down and letting the people around us down, especially if we are making a change that's got that costly investment to it. We're going to be letting people down by not being good enough.
The change point is really important here, I think, because is there that feeling of almost letting somebody down because you've changed careers as well? Because absolutely. You were doing, let's take law, for example. You were doing this, you were doing a really great job, you would have invested in that career. People will have come to you because of that, and then you're going to say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. That's also letting people down in a way, isn't it?
It can be perceived as that, and it certainly can feel like that.
Yeah.
But I think what's important is to recognise that the experience that you take from whatever you've been doing on this pathway, you take with you onto the next pathway. So you are taking that forward. So I was once, many, many decades ago, a lawyer, and I haven't practiced law for a very long time. But I'm still a lawyer with a little L. I've still got a legally trained mind. And that frequently is of great value to me in my role as a psychologist. So it's recognising that is helpful. But you do feel that people will be looking at you, and students will often say, you know, why did you give up being a lawyer? You could earn lots of money. But it's choosing the right pathway for yourself, isn't it?
That really resonates, actually, because I came from recruitment to teaching, and then teaching to, you know, to what I do now. But when I left recruitment for teaching, I did get a lot of people saying, why did you give up that? Because that's, you know, it's a good salary, and it's very, very different. But I took loads of aspects of recruitment, because it's all working with people, into working with different types of people, but it's all, you know, relationships building, which you can, but it's a very different career, having said all of that. So yeah, there were elements of, oh my goodness, what have I done? You know, I was good at that. I don't think, what if I'm not good at this? What if I'm perceived not to be good at this?
Yes, we have to work very hard to establish our credibility in one field, and we climb that ladder, and then we give up on that and start at the bottom of another ladder and have to go through all of that again. But we don't start at the bottom of the next ladder the same as we were before. We take that experience with us.
I like
it's valuing that, isn't it?
Yeah. And what might you say to somebody who wants to make that change, but is, and again, it could be a way that Imposter Phenomenon is presenting. They say, I'm too old, or I'll never learn, or I won't be able to do that. How might you help someone understand that they are capable? It's
finding their motivation. I know I've said this before, but it's finding what are their values. Why do they want to do this? Because if they want to do this to be on a pathway that allows them to live their best life, then it's the right thing for them to do. And it is costly, and it takes time. So we need courage and we need patience if we're going to make a change like that. But in many ways, we not only owe it to ourselves, but we owe it to the people around us to live our best life. I think that helps. With your point, and we talk about values a lot, and you've mentioned values a lot as well, is there a danger that we live our lives by other people's values?
Oh,
so
totally.
like money, Why have you left that job? Because
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important to find out what our values are, and then allow for those values in our life. So say, for example, kindness is a value in someone's life. Then it's allowing the flexibility in our lives to be kind when the moment arises, as well as being kind to ourselves, which you mentioned, which is so important. But if we want to be kind to other people, we can't be on some kind of treadmill. We have to have a couple of moments here that we can give if a stranger needs it, something like that. It's allowing our lives to accommodate our values.
Yeah, until you actually get that, that's such a lovely image there, that I can't be kind if I'm always constantly running this way. And some jobs mean that is all we're doing. So I've never thought of it in that way before. This feels like a whole therapy session. It's lovely. A whole coaching session. If I'm doing this particular job, it doesn't allow me that feeling. And sometimes some jobs just don't. It's not necessarily even about telling, as I do, you go into organisations and go, well, you must make time for people to do what... Sometimes a job doesn't allow that.
No.
Simply.
But we can do that in our lives. It doesn't have to be big things, does it?
Yes.
It can be those small things that contribute to our well-being. It's allowing our busy schedules to value take time for a coffee, take time for a conversation, take time for a walk, take time, allow time if I want to respond to another person. We can build those little things in. But, I mean, kindness isn't everybody's value. Some people, that's not important at all, which is fine. We live to our own values, and that's what's important.
Yeah, and then we're sticking with values because it's an important topic. Why is it so important to understand what those values look like to us? Because kindness, for example, I know the natural thought might be, oh, I'm being kind, so I'm going to give my time or my money to charity or something like that. But actually, kindness can sometimes be not saying something like, I told you so. You know, that's a different way of being kind.
It is a way of being, yes. So, and it is, I think it is very important to take time sometimes to consider, to find out what the values are, and then find out what that means for us in our own lives. Because it's not just a word, as you say, and it can be a misunderstood word. It's what it means to me. But to go back to a point you mentioned earlier, which I kind of glazed over, which I didn't mean to, of course it's never too late in a person's life to make a change. It can be more difficult because of the investment that you said. It's going to be costly. It'll be costly in times of time and finance. And whatever time and finance we put into the new pathway, we won't have for our other precious people and demands. So you have to then justify it. You might have to justify it to other people, but importantly, you have to justify it to yourself, don't you? And having that conversation and recognising that it is a valuable and realistic thing to do can liberate someone to make that change.
And it's about also, I think, you may not ever convince everybody, but it may be a case of when you can convince yourself that that change is important, and then you thrive when that change is made, you can impact so many more people. I mean, I worked with a fitness instructor. He used to do our little segments when we did a radio show, and he changed careers. He was an independent financial advisor. Right. And
Big change.
At the age of 40. So he changed at 40, and he had to justify the training. He had to justify the time. He had to justify the drop-in payment as well. Absolutely. And even now, he isn't earning the same amount, but he is impacting so many people's lives. They love his classes. He's award-winning. And he's thriving in a way that being an independent financial advisor would never have allowed him to do.
And other people can be an independent financial advisor. Other people can do that job. He can do his job. He's the person that needs to do his job. And if he's living his best life, then the people close to him, they might not have all that other money, but they'll be benefiting from his thriving, won't they?
I love that. I love the other people can do it.
Yeah, that's actually really powerful.
Yeah.
Other people can do that. That's what they're for.
Yes.
But he's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That gives us a lot more power and a lot more self-validation. And it's another affirmation, I think, that's just wonderful from you, Judy, that it's okay, because if I thrive here, other people can do that other job.
Yeah.
And that
goes back to your point about, am I letting all those people down by not doing that job? No, someone else can do that. Yeah. I don't have to do everything.
Yes.
I'll just do my little thing here.
It's actually a release as well. It's almost like, that's good, I can leave that behind.
I love that.
And do this. Yeah.
I love that.
It's so simple but so effective, that little statement.
Yeah. And when you say release, yes, actually, we carry so much burden, invisible, unconscious, and it is putting down that one piece of baggage that we're carrying. So you've given us some amazing affirmations. You've given us some incredible nuggets of wisdom to really think about. What would be your, say, top 3 tools or tips that you might give somebody who is struggling, whether it's because they want to change and are unsure as to whether that transition is right for them, or just struggling their own role with imposter phenomenon? How would you help somebody make a start in addressing some of those feelings?
By the gratitude exercises, you mentioned that. I think that's very important, just very simple, building in some very simple gratitude exercises during the day. It's surprising how many people find that difficult when you first encourage them to do it, because that just turns your day into a slightly more positive aspect. I find that's very important. Just taking time to remember why we're doing what we're doing, and that, you know, what we're doing is worthwhile. Taking time to appreciate all the good that we do have in our lives. That links with the gratitude, and the ways in which we are able to live out what we want to do is helpful, isn't it? So those are, I don't want to keep repeating the values thing, but finding our values and living by our values, practicing gratitude, very important, and looking after our well-being in the little ways. Because you won't finish a journey if you're not enjoying the journey.
Oh, that's true.
So we have to, in the little ways that we can, look after our well-being and have those moments that make the journey enjoyable.
Oh gosh, that's so beautiful, and that's so true. Judy, where can we learn more about you, or where can our viewers find you?
So I have a website, which is optimisejl.uk, and that's the best place to contact me. And my email is on the website, so
amazing.
That's the way to go.
I just love our guests.
That was lovely. That was so good, so informative.
Absolutely. And this is what I love about this show. We get the opportunity to speak to people who are doing this day to day, teaching other people about it. And it's just wonderful to learn from them. And that's why we do our key takeaways at the end of each show. I'm going to throw it over to you, Jude.
There was so much to take from what Judy was saying. It was amazing. It was like a therapy session, really, or a coaching session, more like. But there were a few there. One was Judy talked a lot about values, and values, the way we live our life by our values, that is one. But also our own value, our own worth. And I think that's something that really ties in really strongly to imposter phenomenon, because you have to remember you're there for a reason. You're not there because, you'll just do. You're there because you're good at what you do, or you've got experience, or you're qualified, or you're there because you should be. And as long as you just remember that, then you'll be okay. Well, hopefully.
And I like that, because one of the key things that I sometimes take with that is I have to remind myself that my style of training or coaching doesn't suit everybody, and that's okay. It doesn't make me wrong.
No.
It just means that in the same way as you might fancy a burger instead of fish and chips, it's just that doesn't suit you at that particular moment in time.
Well, exactly right. You know, everyone has their own taste of music, of TV, so the same must go of coaching, of coaches. And therapists, etc. So, of course.
I think that's a really nice one. And for me, it was the affirmation of, just because I made a mistake, it doesn't mean I'm a mistake.
Does that really resonate?
Yeah. And it's something I'm going to use now.
Yeah, that was really powerful. There were quite a lot of powerful messages. I think the strongest one was, someone else can do that. Don't worry about that. You're supposed to be doing this. They can do that. And that I don't know, that seems so simple and so obvious, but it's probably not obvious.
It isn't, because the funny thing is, in my training, I use something similar when I talk about people pleasing, because you want to give and give and give. And the affirmation I use there is, if you are doing any of those mindfulness, it's the well of abundance, those kinds of things. One thing that a lot of the guided affirmations I really like keep reminding me is, you don't need to invite other people there. You don't need to share your well of abundance with everybody else. They can create their own one in their minds. And it's a similar sort of thing. We seem to almost have this egotistical view that the world is us and that's it. And it's really not. And it is liberating. You said a release.
I think liberating is a good word for that. Because you can kind of forget. You know, when I left teaching for a long time, I thought, how's my class doing? How are their children doing? You know, I used to do this for them. Like, how are they getting on? No, it's fine. Someone else is doing it. But it's not until sometimes you need to be told the obvious to think the obvious. Someone else is doing it. They're fine with another teacher. So you're right. It doesn't evolve around or revolve around us.
It really, oh gosh, I want to talk about this all day now. I'm going to. What one thing are you going to do this week? What one thing are you going to do this week to take away from today's talk?
Just remember that in whatever role I'm doing it because somebody has put me there because they want me to do that.
I love that.
I think that's the biggest takeaway.
And I'm going to use my affirmation with, if I make a mistake, it doesn't mean I am the mistake, but it means I can fix my mistake if I need to. Thank you so much for tuning in from Judith and myself. Have a healthy week.